Welcome to a video about nutritional considerations. Let's begin with the training diet. The aim of a training diet is to achieve nutritional adequacy to provide the body with recommended intake of vitamins and minerals and also provide appropriate amounts of energy to support training and body composition goals. Carbohydrates such as starches and sugars are a key fuel sources for exercise, especially during long or intense exercises. Although the body can store carbohydrates as glycogen within the skeletal muscles and liver, there is a storage limit, meaning that it is important for an athlete to incorporate adequate energy sources and carbohydrates in their diet. However, a poor training diet can lead to many health problems such as fatigue, being unable to move properly, and having decreased concentration. Every sport will require different needs, so all athletes will need a different training diet to cater to their specific training program or sport. For example, a strongman will have a different diet as opposed to a sprinter, as a strongman may consume more protein and carbohydrates, whereas the sprinter may not intake as much carbohydrates as it can negatively affect their performance. An athlete training at a high intensity or duration will need to increase their carbohydrate intake to provide the body with efficient fuel to continuously be active. On the contrary, a low intensity training day should also mean a low carbohydrate intake. Let's move on to the pre-event meals. The aim of a pre-event meal is to ensure that athletes' glycogen stores are topped up and they are well hydrated and having the right nutrients and fluids. This will provide physiological benefits for athletes. This meal should contain a high volume of carbohydrates, moderate protein volume, and contain low levels of fibers and fats, as meals that contain high levels of fibers and fats take longer to digest, thus can lead to stomach discomfort during exercise. When an athlete is preparing a pre-event meal, they need to consider the duration and intensity level of the event, how long ago was the previous meal or snack, and when does the event start. The human brain requires glucose. Therefore, glycogen stores are utilized overnight to provide for the brain. Thus, it is important for athletes who compete in events during the early mornings to develop a nutritional plan. This can include getting up early to have breakfast or plan a high carbohydrate snack within 1 to 2 hours of the event start time. This allows the athlete to top up the glycogen losses in the liver that were used to provide glucose to the brain. Hydration is significant in athlete success. However, hydration should be carefully planned and should start many hours before an event commences. It is recommended that roughly 300 to 600 milliliters of water or a water bottle should be consumed with the pre-event meal and about another 300 to 400 milliliters of water 20 minutes before the event. Keeping hydrated is important for an athlete as it helps maximize physical performance. Carbohydrate loading. Carbohydrate loading refers to strategies that aim to maximize muscle glycogen stores prior to a competitive event. Although it is beneficial to carb load, it is not necessary for exercises less than 60 minutes, as it has negative effects on performance. An athlete that does not need to carb load would only need around 5 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight. However, for endurance events lasting longer than 90 minutes, such as marathons or long distance swimming, an effective carbohydrate loading can improve the overall performance of an athlete by 2 to 3%, improving their endurance or concentration during the competition. Carbohydrate loading usually consists of 3 to 4 day depletion phase, which involves hard training and a low carbohydrate diet, then followed by a 3 to 4 day loading phase, which is a light training and carbohydrate diet. Recent statistical studies have proven that glycogen stores can be increased by following a high carbohydrate diet for 36 to 48 hours while the athlete is rested. It is also recommended that the carbohydrate intake for carbohydrate loading to be effective is about 8 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight. An effective carbohydrate loading plan can increase an athlete's weight gain by 1 kilogram. This is due to the increased glycogen in the muscles and extra water stores within the glycogen. Let's move on to during performance. Athletes will need to avoid having an excess amount of sugary soft drinks or energy gels, as it could lead to stomach cramps, bloating, or diarrhea. However, a balance between sport foods and clean foods is the most beneficial for an athlete. An example of this is having a sports soft drink that contains electrolytes with a side of fresh fruits. Fluid. Constantly keeping the body with sufficient fluid is important, as it hydrates the body to prevent physiological trauma. In saying so, there are many ways that fluid losses can occur. An individual's genetics can make them sweat more than others, the environment, So if it's a sunny or humid day, it is more likely that an athlete will sweat. And of course, it also depends on the type of intensity that the athlete is performing in. A higher intensity means more sweat. An athlete may experience negative effects on their performance if they are even just 2% dehydrated, meaning that it is important to maintain hydration levels. Side effects of dehydration could be feeling dizzy, having a loss of concentration, or feeling fatigued. An athlete can calculate their fluid loss simply through measuring their body weight before and after exercise with minimal clothing to none, and as 1 kilogram of weight loss is reduced, approximately 1 liter of fluid loss is reduced. An example of this is if an athlete weighed in at 100 kilograms prior to the exercise and 95 kilograms after the exercise, then the 5 kilogram of weight loss will reflect a fluid loss of roughly 5 liters. This is hypothetically. Overhydration. Although it may be a positive if an athlete consumes a lot of fluid, consuming an excess amount of fluid, also known as overhydration, will have harmful negative effects. It is important that individuals do not overhydrate themselves, as it could lead to discomfort in the stomach or can lead to hyponatremia, which is having low blood sodium levels, a dangerous and life-threatening symptom. Therefore, it is a must that athletes have a well-structured diet plan to make sure they are receiving the correct and sufficient amount of food and fluid before and during their event to prevent stomach problems or fatigue. Post-performance. The aim of post-performance or recovery meal is to provide carbohydrates to refuel and protein to repair muscle tissues, while also consuming fluid to restore any dehydration. Most athletes are told to consume about 1 to 1.2 grams of carbohydrates per 1 kilogram of body weight within the first hour of post-training because during this time, glycogen synthesis is the greatest. Consuming high carbohydrates post-performance is important as it refuels the muscles and liver glycogen stores more quickly. Consuming a small amount of protein is also necessary to repair the muscle tissue fibers, and athletes are recommended to have 15 grams of protein after an intense exercise. After an intense exercise or workout, an athlete's immune system will be inactive for many hours. That is why it is proven that with a nutritious recovery meal, athletes are able to prevent themselves from catching any infectious illnesses and have nutrients in their system. Do athletes need a post-performance meal? Depending on an athlete's exercise or intensity, it can help determine whether they need a post-performance meal or not. An athlete training at low intensity or short duration of time will not require a post-performance meal, as it is less likely for them to use up the glycogen stores, and thus do not need to replenish the glycogen stores. Excess carbohydrates that is not being used to its full could lead to weight gain, affecting an athlete's performance. Dietary requirements of athletes in different sports. All sports will require athletes to have different nutritional needs. For example, when comparing the dietary needs of a marathon runner who runs 42 kilometers and that of a powerlifter whose focus is to lift heavy weights, they will both have different diets. A marathon runner will require an extensive amount of energy to run 42 kilometers or more. This will mean that they will need to have enough energy to burn roughly 3,300 to 3,500 calories. On the other hand, a powerlifter would not need to consume as much carbohydrates, but will need to eat around 2,400 to 3,000 calories a day. Also have a lot of protein to be able to continue to lift, as protein helps repair the damaged muscles. Let's move on to the last one. Students learn to. The students learn to is to compare the dietary requirements of athletes in different sports considering the pre, during, and post-performance needs. Today, the two sports that I will be comparing is soccer and gymnastics. Already we know that soccer can last for a long duration of time, generally 90 minutes, and during this 90 minutes the athletes are constantly running and kicking the ball, so they will need a high carbohydrate intake to fuel them throughout the 90 minutes, whereas gymnastics is a sport that favors athletes who are low in body mass. Prior to competition, soccer players will generally consume a high volume of carbohydrates 2 to 4 hours prior to the match. Carbohydrates such as pasta and rice are recommended. Leading up to the match 1 to 2 hours prior, these athletes will also consume a light quantity of carbohydrate snacks, such as yogurt or a muesli bar, compared to a gymnastic athlete who will only consume a light carbohydrate meal 1 to 2 hours prior, such as fruits or yogurt. Both soccer and gymnastics will require athletes to consume fluids regularly. However, soccer players will need to frequently have access to fluids like water or sports drink, whereas a gymnastics person will only be able to drink fluids between performances. Fruits and light snacks are also recommended for both sports during performance. After a competition, soccer players will need a full recovery meal to repair muscle tissues, and replace the fluid lost. This compares to an athlete in gymnastics because they will only need a light carbohydrate snack and a meal with carbohydrates, proteins, and water to recover. Thank you for listening.